In the world of high-stakes textiles and international fashion, the name Sterling & Co. was a legacy. But legacies are fragile things. They are built on years of tradition, but can be destroyed by a single decade of bad management. For 5 years, I sat at the dinner table of the Sterling family estate, listening to Amber's father talk about the weight of the crown. I listened to Amber complain about the stress of leadership, and every time I stayed silent. To them, I was just Sebastian, the man who married into the family and worked a comfortable job in mid-level accounting. I was the quiet husband who didn't have the sterling fire. They didn't know that every time their stock prices dipped, it was my private equity firm, Aegis Holdings, that stabilized them. They didn't know that the anonymous donor who bailed out their warehouse fire 3 years ago was me. I didn't do it for the credit. I did it because I loved Amber, and I wanted her to look at her father with pride, believing she had saved the family name herself. But you can only carry a person for so long before they start to believe they are flying on their own. The night the shield broke. The Sterling family was hosting their annual Founders Gala. The room was a sea of old money and new arrogance. I stood by the balcony, watching Amber. She was in her element, draped in silk and confidence. That was when Vincent arrived. Vincent was the CEO of Nexus Corp, a predatory rival that had been trying to swallow Sterling & Co. for years. He was loud, charismatic, and wore his ambition like a weapon. He didn't just walk into a room, he occupied it. "Amber," Vincent said, taking her hand and kissing it with a flourish that made my stomach turn. "You look like a woman who is tired of carrying a dying empire. Why struggle with the past when you could be the queen of the future? Nexus and Sterling, it's a match made in heaven." Amber laughed, her eyes flickering toward me for a brief, dismissive second. "My father is hesitant about a merger, Vincent. He thinks we can still stand alone." With all due respect, Vincent leaned in, his voice loud enough for the nearby circle to hear. "Your family is standing on a crumbling foundation. You need a partner who can match your drive, not someone who is content with a 9-to-5 and a quiet life." He looked directly at me. The circle of socialites snickered. Elara didn't defend me. She didn't even flinch. She just smiled at Vincent, her eyes bright with a new, dangerous hunger. The cold realization. 2 weeks later, the silence in our home was broken by the sound of a suitcase being zipped shut. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom. Amber was packing. She didn't look sad. She looked reborn. "I'm leaving, Sebastian," she said. She didn't even pause to look at me. "I've spent 5 years trying to make you into something you're not. I thought if I gave you a place in my family, you'd find some ambition, but you're just stagnant. You're a safe harbor, but I want the storm." "The storm has a way of sinking ships, Amber," I said quietly. "Vincent understands me," she snapped, finally looking at me. Her face was full of a cold, sharp pity. "He's a force of nature. He's taking Sterling & Co. to the global stage. He's offered a merger that will save my father's legacy. He's the partner I deserve." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I could see the Aegis Holdings building from here, the tallest tower in the district. "You think Vincent is the one saving you?" I asked. "He has the capital, Sebastian. He has the vision. What do you have? A desk in an accounting firm? A quiet life in the suburbs? I'm filing for divorce. I want someone who can build an empire, not someone who just manages one." I felt the last thread of my patience snap. It wasn't a loud break. It was a silent, final click. "If that is your choice, Amber, then I won't stop you. But remember this. You never see the pillars of a building until the roof starts to fall." "I'll take my chances," she said, grabbing her bag. "Goodbye, Sebastian. Try to find some life in you." She walked out. She didn't know that she had just walked away from the only person who was keeping her family from bankruptcy. The moment the front door closed, I didn't cry. I didn't pour a drink. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "This is Sebastian," I said. My voice was no longer the quiet husband. It was the voice of the man who controlled 51% of the Sterling & Co. debt. "Sir," my lead analyst sounded surprised. "We weren't expecting a call until next quarter." "Change of plans," I said, watching Amber's car pull out of the driveway. "Sterling & Co. is attempting a merger with Nexus Corp. I want you to block it. Then I want you to call in all outstanding loans on the Sterling family estate, effective immediately." "Sir, that will bankrupt them within 30 days. "I know," I said, the coldness in my heart finally matching the coldness in my voice. "It's time for the force of nature to see what happens when the wind stops blowing." True power isn't the person standing in the spotlight. It's the person who owns the stage, the lights, and the theater itself. 2 weeks had passed since the echo of the front door had faded from our home. To the world, I was just a ghost, a man whose absence was barely noticed in the glittering circles of the Sterling family. Amber had wasted no time. Every social media post was a calculated strike. Photos of her and Vincent in high-rise offices, captions about new beginnings and finding a partner who speaks the language of success. She looked radiant, or at least she looked like someone who had finally convinced herself she was happy. But while they were drinking vintage champagne to celebrate their power merger, I was sitting in the glass-walled offices of Aegis Holdings. The Sterling Group has officially signed the letter of intent with Vincent's firm, my lead counsel, a sharp woman named Rhea, said, as she placed a file on my desk. "They've over-leveraged their remaining assets to make the deal look attractive to the banks. They think they're entering a new era of growth." "They are," I said, looking out at the city, "the era of the fall." A few days later, a high-level board meeting was called at the Sterling headquarters. I wasn't invited, of course. I was the unambitious accountant they had discarded. But through my holdings, I had a seat at that table, represented by a silent proxy. Amber's father, the patriarch of the Sterling name, sat at the head of the table. He looked at Vincent with the kind of admiration he had never shown me. "Vincent is a trailblazer," the old man announced to the board. "He brings the capital and the aggression we need to survive in this market. Unlike our previous associations, we finally have a man of action leading us." Vincent leaned back, his smile sharp and predatory. "I don't just survive, sir. I dominate. Within 90 days, the Sterling name will be part of a global conglomerate. We've trimmed the dead weight, personally and professionally." Amber sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She didn't look at the empty chair where I used to sit during family dinners. She was too busy looking at the titan she had chosen. The celebration didn't last an hour. A secretary entered the room, her face as white as the report in her hand. She whispered something to Amber's father. His expression shifted from triumph to confusion, then to a sudden, chilling fear. "What is it?" Amber asked, her smile faltering. "The bank," her father stammered. "They've just frozen our line of credit, and they're calling in the emergency loan from 3 years ago, the one the anonymous donor provided." Vincent frowned, his titan persona flickering for a second. "That's impossible. That was a private arrangement. Why would they call it in now? It's not due for another 5 years." "There was a clause," the father whispered, his hands trembling. "A clause that stated if the Sterling family ever entered into a merger without the donor's express written consent, the total balance, $200 million, would be due in 24 hours. Amber turned to Vincent. But we have the capital from your firm, right? You said your firm was a mastermind of liquidity. We can just pay it off." Vincent's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. He cleared his throat, looking at the papers. "200 million, Amber? My firm is built on debt-to-equity swaps. I have the assets, but I don't have that kind of cash sitting in a vault. No one does." That was the moment the reality began to sink in. For 5 years, they had assumed the Sterling Group was thriving because of their legacy. They didn't realize they were living in a fortress I had built for them. Every time a bill was too high, I paid it. Every time a loan was at risk, I bought it. I was the shield that kept the rain off their heads. And Amber had just told the shield it was too heavy to carry. My phone rang 10 minutes later. It was Amber. I didn't answer. It rang again, then a text followed. "Sebastian, pick up. Something is happening at the office. My father is in a panic. We need you to look at the books. There's some mistake with the donor's contract." I looked at the phone until the screen went dark. I remembered the nights I spent at that same office fixing the mess her father had made, while she was out at galas complaining that I didn't have enough drive. I remembered the way she looked at Vincent, the way she looked at the storm. Well, the storm was finally here. The next morning, the Sterling estate was a war zone. I didn't go there, but my lawyers did. By noon, the news had hit the financial wires. The Sterling Group was in a liquidity crisis. Their power partner, Vincent, had already started distancing himself. In a frantic press release, his firm claimed they were re-evaluating the feasibility of the merger due to undisclosed financial liabilities on the Sterling side. Vincent didn't stay to fight the storm. He did what all predators do when the prey is no longer easy. He looked for an exit. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, the wind whipping at my shirt. A wolf is a beautiful creature until the winter comes. Then you realize it was never there to protect the pack. It was only there to feed on it. My private line rang. This time I answered. "Sebastian?" Amber's voice was unrecognizable. The confidence was gone. The queen of the future sounded like a lost child. "Vincent, he's pulling out. He says our company is a sinking ship. My father, he's going to lose the house. He's going to lose everything." "I know," I said. "How? How do you know?" "Because I'm the one who bought the debt, Amber. I'm the anonymous donor you've been living off of for 5 years." There was a silence so profound I could hear her breathing on the other end. It was the sound of a world collapsing. "You?" she whispered. "But you're just Sebastian Lane. You work in accounting." "I own the firm that owns your accounting, Amber. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to love the man, not the balance sheet. But you decided the man wasn't enough. You wanted a trailblazer. You wanted the Titan." "Sebastian, please," she sobbed. "I made a mistake. I didn't know. We can fix this. I'll call off the divorce. I'll tell everyone." "You already told the world everything I needed to know, Amber. You told them I was dead weight. You told them I was stagnant. I think it's time you learned how to stand on your own 2 feet. Or better yet, ask Vincent to hold you up. I'm sure he's very good at it." I hung up. The silence that follows a life-altering truth is different from any other kind of quiet. It's heavy, like the air before a devastating storm. After I hung up on Amber, I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I expected. I just felt a profound sense of closure. For years I had lived 2 lives, the unambitious husband who made the coffee and listened to the insults, and the silent hand that kept a multi-million-dollar empire from flatlining. Now those 2 worlds were finally colliding. At the Sterling Group headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted from corporate elegance to pure panic. Amber sat in the glass-walled boardroom, her phone trembling in her hand. She had called Vincent 22 times in the last hour. When he finally picked up, his voice wasn't the smooth, confident purr of the dynamic leader she had left me for. It was cold, sharp, and hurried. "Vincent, where are you?" Amber asked, her voice cracking. "The auditors are here. They're saying the Aegis debt is being called in immediately. You said your firm would handle the transition. You said you were a mastermind of high-level mergers." "Amber, be realistic," Vincent snapped. I could hear the sound of a suitcase being snapped shut in the background of his call. "My investors saw the morning headlines. The Sterling Group isn't a merger opportunity anymore. It's a black hole. If I tie my firm to your father's debt, I'll be ruined by the weekend." "But you said you loved me," she whispered, the words sounding hollow even to her. "You said Sebastian Lane was dead weight and that you were the one who could take me to the top." "Sebastian Lane was dead weight, but at least he was silent. You brought me into a house that was already on fire, Amber. I'm a businessman, not a firefighter. Our partnership is officially over. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. Amber looked up to see her father standing in the doorway. The patriarch of the Sterling name looked like he had aged 20 years in a single morning. His legacy, his pride, and his home were all tied to the debt I now held in my hand. The following morning, a fleet of black sedans pulled up to the front of the Sterling Group's flagship building. The employees whispered in the hallways. They had heard that the anonymous benefactor was finally revealing themselves. They expected a faceless lawyer or a cold-eyed corporate raider. Instead, they got me. I walked through the lobby, my tailored suit a sharp contrast to the casual sweaters I used to wear around the Sterling estate. I didn't look like the man who stayed at home and managed the house. I looked like the man who owned the street the building was standing on. When I reached the top floor, the secretary, a woman who had ignored me for 5 years, gasped, "Mr. Sebastian, you can't be here. There's a high-level meeting with the new owners." "I know," I said, not slowing down. "I'm the one who called it." I pushed open the boardroom doors. Amber and her father were there, surrounded by a team of lawyers who looked like they were preparing for an execution. When they saw me, the air seemed to leave the room. Amber stood up, her eyes wide, with a mixture of horror and a sudden, desperate hope. "Sebastian? Thank God. You're here. Did you speak to the Aegis people? Can you talk to them? My father, he's losing everything." I didn't answer her. I walked to the head of the long mahogany table, the seat her father had occupied for 40 years, and I pulled it out. "Sebastian Lane, what are you doing?" her father barked, his old-world arrogance struggling to survive the crisis. "That is my chair. This is a private legal matter. Leave us at once." I sat down. I placed a leather briefcase on the table and opened it. "The chair belongs to the majority shareholder, Arthur," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And as of 9 o'clock this morning, that is me." I slid a document across the table. It was the deed of transfer. Aegis Holdings had officially moved from a creditor to a parent company. Amber's face went completely bloodless. She looked at me, then at the document, then back at me. The man she had ridiculed for having no drive was now the person who decided if she had a roof over her head. You did this?" Amber whispered. "You spent years lying to us? You watched us struggle and you kept this a secret?" "I didn't watch you struggle, Amber," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I spent 5 years making sure you didn't struggle. I paid the taxes on this building. I covered your father's gambling debts in Macau. I funded the lifestyle you used to mock for me not having. I was the floor you walked on, and you mistook my support for weakness." "Sebastian, please," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "We're family." "We were family," I corrected him, "until your daughter decided a force of nature like Vincent was more valuable than a husband. You all wanted the storm. Well, look around. The windows are breaking and the roof is gone. I stood up, closing my briefcase. The terms are simple. The Sterling Group will be liquidated. The brand name will be retired. You have 48 hours to vacate the estate. I've bought the property, and I intend to turn it into a foundation for families who actually value loyalty. Amber stepped toward me, her hand reaching out, trying to find the man who used to forgive her every whim. "Sebastian, wait! I made a mistake. I was blinded by the lights, by the ambition. We can fix this. I still love you." I looked at her hand, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. "You don't love me, Amber. You love the safety I provided, but you traded that safety for a titan who ran away the moment the check bounced. You didn't want a husband, you wanted a trophy, and trophies are only valuable when they're sitting on someone else's shelf. You can never truly value the light until you've stood in the cold of your own making, realizing the sun you walked away from was the only thing keeping you warm." I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look back at the tears or the shouting. As I stepped into the elevator, I saw my reflection in the polished gold doors. I wasn't the quiet accountant anymore. I was a man who had finally stepped out of the shadow of a name that didn't deserve me. There is a specific sound that a house makes when it's being emptied, a hollow, echoing thud that reminds you that walls are just skin and furniture is just bone. 48 hours. That was all the time I gave them. It was more than the Sterling family had ever given the people they stepped on during their climb to the top. I stood across the street, leaning against the door of my car, watching the movers carry the heavy mahogany furniture out of the Sterling estate. This was the golden cage where I had spent 5 years being the invisible husband. I watched as they carried out the grand piano Amber never played, and the portraits of Arthur's ancestors, men who had built a name that their children had finally managed to break. Arthur stood on the driveway, his expensive silk shirt damp with sweat, arguing with a mover about a crate of vintage wine. He looked small. For the first time in his life, the Sterling name didn't give him any height. Then I saw Amber. She walked out of the front doors, clutching a small designer bag, the only thing she was allowed to keep. She looked around at the chaos, her eyes searching for a miracle, searching for Vincent, searching for anyone who could tell her this was just a bad dream. But the only person there was me. She saw me. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. She crossed the street, dodging a moving truck, her breathing ragged. "Sebastian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, scanning my face for a flicker of the man who used to wait up for her with a warm meal. "You're really doing this? You're watching us be thrown into the street?" "I'm not doing anything, Amber," I said, my voice as level as a horizon. "I'm simply stopping the charity. You told me you wanted to stand on your own. You told me you wanted to be with a force of nature. Well, the nature of the world is that when you stop paying for a house, you have to leave it." "We have nowhere to go," she sobbed. "My father's accounts are frozen. Vincent won't even take a lawyer's call. He's blocked me on everything. He took the shares I transferred to him and he sold them to a competitor just to save his own skin." I looked at the house one last time. "Vincent didn't betray you, Amber. He just behaved exactly like the man you described. You said he was a predator, a leader of industry. Predators don't share their kills, and they certainly don't stay when the territory goes cold." "Please," she reached out, her fingers brushing my sleeve. "Just one more month, just until we find a place, for the sake of what we had." I gently stepped back, moving my arm out of her reach. "What we had was a lie, Amber. I was a safety net you mistook for a floor. And as for a place to stay, I hear there are some very nice apartments in the district where the people you used to look down on live. Perhaps it's time you met them. The following night was the Global Finance Summit, an event the Sterlings had attended for 30 years as royalty. This year, they weren't on the guest list. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of power. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and old secrets. Every major player in the city was there, buzzing about the mysterious collapse of the Sterling Group and the sudden rise of the silent titan, Aegis Holdings. When the doors opened and the announcer called my name, the room went silent. Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and CEO of Aegis Holdings. I had used my mother's maiden name for my business for years. The name Sebastian Donovan was a phantom in the financial world, a man whispered about but never seen. Seeing me walk onto that stage was like seeing a statue come to life. I could see the faces in the crowd. People who had seen me at galas as the quiet husband were now choking on their drinks. They looked at me with a new kind of fear, the fear of realizing they had been rude to the man who now held their contracts. I didn't give a long speech. I didn't need to. For too long, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing with a calm authority. The industry has valued the noise over the signal. We have mistaken the titan for the architect. Aegis Holdings is here to remind the world that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply needs to be the foundation. After the event, I walked toward the valet. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the marble pillars. It was Amber. She had managed to get past security, probably using her old connections one last time. She was wearing the same dress from the night I signed the papers, but it looked frayed, exhausted. "Sebastian," she said, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of me surrounded by security and assistants. "I saw the news. I saw the name. Donovan. You're the Donovan of the Donovan International merger?" "I am," I said. "If I had known," she started, then stopped, the sheer ugliness of the sentence hanging in the air. "If you had known I was rich, you would have stayed," I finished for her. "If you had known I held the power, you would have been loyal. But that's not loyalty, Amber. That's just a long-term transaction, and I've decided to close the account." "I'm your wife," she screamed, the desperation finally turning into a jagged, ugly rage. "You can't just erase me. I deserve a part of this. I spent 5 years with you." I paused at the door of my car. I looked at her, and for the first time, I let a small, cold smile touch my face. "You spent 5 years being taken care of by a man you didn't respect. Consider that your payment. My driver will see you out of the private lot, Amber. Don't come back." A person who only loves you when the sun is shining doesn't deserve to stand beside you when you've finally cleared the clouds. As the car pulled away, I looked out the window at the city. It looked different now. The lights seemed clearer. The weight I had carried for 5 years, the weight of pretending to be less than I was to make her feel like more, was gone. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my legal team. "Vincent's firm has declared bankruptcy. He's fled the country to avoid the fraud investigation into the Sterling merger. Everything is finalized. You are the sole owner." I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the leather and the quiet. I had been the silent shareholder of her life. I had funded her dreams, protected her father, and built her world. She had traded all of it for a man who was nothing more than a loud shadow. And now the shadow was gone. The world was quiet. And for the first time, I was home. 1 year later. The city had a way of moving on, of burying old names under the weight of new scandals and fresh fortunes. The Sterling Group was now a footnote in financial textbooks, a cautionary tale of what happens when a legacy is built on ego rather than stone. I stood on the balcony of the new Aegis headquarters, watching the sunrise paint the skyline in shades of copper and violet. This building wasn't a glass cage. It was open, filled with light and the quiet hum of people who actually enjoyed their work. I wasn't a silent shareholder anymore. I was a leader who didn't need to shout to be heard. My life was quiet. I spent my weekends in the countryside, restoring old watches, a hobby Amber used to call pointless and slow. I found beauty in the gears, in the way tiny, invisible parts kept the whole machine moving. It was a metaphor for the life I had built. I was in the city for a charity board meeting. Afterward, I walked through a small park near the district where the city's mid-level workers spent their lunch breaks. I needed the air. I needed to feel the ground beneath my feet. That was when I saw her. Amber was sitting on a wooden bench, wearing a simple uniform from a nearby high-end department store. Her hair, once styled by the most expensive salons, was pulled back in a practical, tired ponytail. She was eating a sandwich from a plastic container, her eyes fixed on a fashion magazine that featured a woman wearing the kind of dress she used to discard after one night. I didn't try to hide. I didn't try to confront her. I just walked past. "Sebastian?" The voice was soft, hesitant. I stopped and turned. She stood up, the plastic container nearly slipping from her lap. She looked at me, and I saw the map of the last year written on her face. The lines around her eyes weren't from laughter. They were from the cold reality of a life without a safety net. "Hello, Amber," I said. My voice was kind, but it was the kindness one shows to a distant acquaintance, not a former lover. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the pavement, a sound that used to signal her arrival at a gala, now just the sound of a woman on a 30-minute lunch break. "I saw the news about the new hospital wing you funded, the Donovan Center for Integrity. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "The city needed it." "Sebastian," she stepped closer, the smell of cheap perfume and department store makeup clinging to her. "I'm living in a studio on 4th Street. My father, he's in a state-run home. He doesn't even recognize me half the time. He just keeps asking when the Aegis people are coming to save him." She looked at my suit, a handmade piece that spoke of true, quiet wealth, and then at my face. "I spent a year thinking about that last day. I spent a year realizing that the boring life I mocked was actually the most expensive thing I ever owned. You weren't stagnant, Sebastian. You were the only thing that was real." "I was real, Amber, but I was also invisible to you. You can't see the air until you're drowning." She reached out, her fingers hovering near my hand, but she didn't dare touch me. "Vincent, they caught him in Panama last month. He's facing 20 years for the Sterling fraud. He told the investigators that I was the one who signed the final transfer. He tried to blame me for everything, Sebastian. Even at the end, he was trying to use me to save himself." "I know," I said. "I'm the one who provided the evidence to clear your name. I didn't want you in a cell, Amber. I just wanted you to be free to live the life you chose." She froze. "You cleared me? After everything I said? After how I treated you?" "I didn't do it for you," I said, looking her in the eye. "I did it for the man I was when I loved you. He deserved to know that his final act was one of protection, but that man is gone now." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She saw the absolute lack of anger in my eyes. Anger would have meant I still cared. Indifference was far worse. It was the finality of a closed book. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice breaking. The house? The dinners? Us? I looked at the park, at the people living their ordinary, difficult, beautiful lives. I miss the man I thought you were, I said. But the us was just a house built on sand, Amber. I much prefer the foundation I'm standing on now. My driver pulled up to the curb. I checked my watch, the one I had restored myself. It was ticking perfectly, every gear in its place. I have to go, Amber. I have a meeting. Will I see you again? She asked, a desperate final hope in her eyes. The world is a large place, Amber, but it feels much smaller when you stop looking for the light and start being it. I stepped into the car. As we pulled away, I looked back through the tinted glass. Amber was still standing on the sidewalk, clutching her plastic lunch container, watching the car disappear into the sea of traffic. She was standing in the sun, but she looked colder than I had ever seen her. True wealth isn't what you have in your bank account. It's the peace you feel when you no longer have to pretend to be someone else for a person who never saw the real you. The car turned the corner and the park vanished. I opened a file on my lap, ready for the next project, the next building, the next silent success. The silent shareholder was no longer a secret. He was simply a man who had reclaimed his life. And for the first time, the silence was the most beautiful sound in the world.
Thank you for sharing this chapter with us at Velvet Chapters Brew. Comment, like, and subscribe to see where the next page takes us.